Hey, good evening. My name is Rashida Tyler. I am the new associate, the deputy executive director of the New York State Council of Churches, and I'm joined tonight by the executive director of the New York State Council of Churches, Peter Cook. Hey, Peter, square down there. And this is my first seminar, virtual seminar for the State Council of Churches. I'm also the pre-development project manager for the Interfaith Affordable Housing Collaborative. And so I'm very happy to be here for this presentation of a seminar that continues a series of policy seminars that the church, the New York State Council of Churches puts on throughout the fall that leads up to its legislative asks during the Ecumenical and Interfaith Advocacy Day, which this year is being held on February 27th and 28th, right here in Albany at the Westminster Church. So you can register to join that event at nyscoc.org or at the link that I'm going to drop in the chat a little bit later. But today we are joined by leaders in the labor rights movement and advocates in the labor rights movement to talk about the topics before the legislature this year for labor and wages that impact workers throughout New York State. We have some pretty big bills that are up for consideration, and we have some stalwart advocates that are here with us who will be able to walk us through those bills, and then also how we can get involved and support their work and their efforts. So first, the council begins every seminar with some grounding work to place things in perspective in a theological and racial justice perspective. So I'd like to hand this off to Joe, you're the executive director of the labor, no,
No, I'm not.
lead.
No stolen valor here. I'm the lead organizer for the Labor Religion Coalition.
Cool. The lead organizer for the Labor and Religion Coalition, and a friend that I've known for many years, and just a great advocate in the Hudson, not from the Hudson Valley, but now in the Capital Region, Joe Paparone.
Well, thanks, Rashida. Yeah, lots of familiar faces here. I'm really glad to be here and invited by Rashida and Peter. Once again, I'm Joe Paparone, the lead organizer with the Labor Religion Coalition. I'm also a coordinator of the New York State Poor People's Campaign and a licensed Mennonite minister. If you know what a Mennonite is, you might be thinking to yourself, oh, you have a mustache and your beard's not that long and you're on a computer. We're in like the same branch of the Christian family tree as the Amish, but not quite that extreme. But a long history of justice work and peacemaking in the Mennonites. And that's what attracted me to it. So yeah, I've been invited to share a little bit of theological grounding this morning, which is intimidating when I know some clergy folks are here and some also real serious advocates who maybe know some of this stuff better than me. But nonetheless, if you'll indulge me, there are so many pieces of faith traditions and our holy texts that can really influence our thinking around labor broadly, wages in particular. I'm going to just pick a couple to start with, primarily concepts from the Hebrew scriptures, but actually in my interfaith work, like we found this kind of stuff resonates everywhere. You can find this in every major faith tradition. And one thing that I try and do whenever I'm approaching any religious text is avoid spiritualized and individualized understandings. And instead try and focus on material and collective readings of any particular text. It's not to say that individual or spiritual readings are bad, but I think there's a reason that those are the most dominant ways that when we read a text, we think, oh, this is what this means for me and for my personal feelings and relationship with the divine. But I think if we approach it with a material and collective sense, there's a whole lot more we can draw from. And I found it to be, frankly, one of the most useful and coherent through lines for me to read the entireties of the text. So I want to start with this, not quite the first story in the Bible, but it actually is one of the orienting stories of the Hebrew Scriptures, and that is the Exodus. If even if you're not very familiar with church or synagogue, you've probably heard a little bit about this story. It's pretty widespread in popular culture. But the Hebrews are enslaved in Egypt. And then Moses, with the help of God intervening in various ways, leads them through the Red Sea to freedom. But it ain't that simple and straightforward. They spend 40 years wandering the desert. But before we get to all that, really, Exodus, as I said, it's not the first text in the Bible, but it is actually one of the orienting stories. For centuries, people who read these texts, they understand the entirety of the Hebrew Scriptures really primarily through that lens, as one of God hears the cry of the oppressed and delivers them to freedom through the work of his people, right? Through faithful people like Moses. And that leads us to this question. All right, well, who are the oppressed? Why are they oppressed? Where does that cry generate from? And it starts from labor exploitation. It starts from the Hebrews who are enslaved in Egypt, and they're forced to make bricks, and Pharaoh gets ticked off at them at one point and demands that they do less, or that they do more with less, even restricts the amount of resources they have and forces them to build more. The oppression is racialized, right? They're separated sort of by their ethnicity in that space. So parallels to today, how our oppression gets separated, and our people of our class get sliced up on these kinds of race distinctions. But if you've seen The Prince of Egypt, that animated film a while ago, or just read your Bible a little bit, you know all the pieces. There's a series of plagues that befall Egypt, and Moses comes back. He leaves and then comes back, and he leads everyone through the Red Sea. They're wandering the desert, and he gets the 10 Commandments. He goes up on the mountain, and the Big Ten, right? And one of them is about the Sabbath. Now, I'm going to come back to that in a second. And get into it a little more in depth. But the people are taken care of by God in the wilderness by practicing a rhythm of work and rest, in a sense. So the Sabbath is actually connected to how God provides for the people in the desert, that they are supposed to work and gather the food and supplies that they need for 6 days. And on that 6th day, they gather enough for 2 days because they're not supposed to work every single day of the week, right? This is actually a labor question. How are we supposed to structure our society? How are we supposed to structure our communities? Are we automatons that are just forced to work endlessly simply to survive? Or does our world provide enough resources for everyone to meet their needs, such that we can develop healthy and generative rhythms of work and rest? And so the Sabbath is one of the big 10 of the commandments. Remember the Sabbath day, keep it holy. Don't do any work. The animals aren't supposed to work on the Sabbath even. It's pretty extensive. But that gets boiled down a lot today into this very personalized kind of attitude of well, you deserve a day off. You should take a break sometimes. You have boundaries, self-care, work-life balance kind of thing. This is all very relevant for everybody. I sometimes need to hear that message, right? But it's a very individualized way of understanding this much more collective concept and a material concept, right? That we are not supposed to be exploited, so that our labor is the only thing of value that that profit is extracted from our work, right? It's the idea of the Sabbath comes into conflict with economic systems that would drive production solely for profit. And I think when we position ourselves and understand ourselves as part of the poor and working class, the idea of a day off sounds ridiculous, right? Like, if you're poor, someone to say to you, hey, you know what, you deserve a day off. I'm like, of course I do, right? But who's going to pay the bills? Who's going to take care of the kids? Who's going to do X, Y, Z? Our society is not structured for people to have any sort of rhythm and rest in their life. And so people are forced to work more and more hours, multiple jobs, et cetera. Later on in the Christian scriptures, Jesus comes into conflict with people about this, about the Sabbath, right? And he says the Sabbath was made for humanity, not the other way around, right? The idea of a Sabbath and rhythms of work and rest are actually, again, to promote the like I said, healthy rhythms of work and rest, but also to show us that we are not simply exploitable tools like any other. Now, to step out of holy texts, we understand to the extent that any of us get time off, right? Like that wasn't because the people in power, heard a word from God and decided, hey, you know what, you should have the weekend. That came through struggle, right? Like none of this stuff comes through because somebody had a good idea about giving people a break. It comes through solidarity and collective action, right? So yeah, we should have a Sabbath. We should have more than a day off, like a weekend. We should have an 8-hour workday. And the only way we're going to get that is when we organize together collectively as a class to confront the powers of capital, to insist that no, we're not just tools and machines like any other that you might buy that you can exploit for profit. But instead, we are human beings and we deserve dignity, respect at work. We deserve to be able to earn enough to take care of our families. And ultimately, we want to work for a vision of society where exploitation doesn't exist at all any further. And there are some folks on I would say, like leftist socialist circles who kind of imagine a future of automation where like nobody really has to work anymore. But there are deep, actually, theological traditions and religious community traditions, and I think specifically of the Catholic worker tradition and Dorothy Day. She wrote a lot about what does work look like in the context of the beloved community. And there's lots of work to be done, right? I was just at the press conference today for Fair Pay for Home Care, Caring Majority. I know many of you were there, or at least very supportive, right? There's lots of work to be done. But when we step out of those economic relations, right, that work is something that we do for the benefit of all of society, for the benefit of our communities. And there can be joy in that work that is different than the exploitative nature of our capitalist relations. So that's all from me. I hope that provides a little bit of orientation and grounding for you, and perhaps motivation. I know many of you are deeply committed to this work. And so I'm glad to be here with you. As Rashida mentioned a little earlier, I have to hop off in about 10 minutes, but I'm glad to be here to get things started. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joe. As always, you're amazing. My camera's doing something funky, which is kind of funny because literally I'm on a whole different computer. So this keeps happening. This is a different computer than I ordinarily use. But you can check out the Labor and Religion Coalition, laborreligion.org online. And check out what Joe is doing. He's doing amazing work with the Poor People's Campaign. Keep up with him. And thank you so much, Joe, for being a guest and for speaking. And yes, Joe popped his link in the chat. Thank you. So the next person that we have who's going to speak for us is going to help us ground or put today's seminar in perspective of racial justice lens. And we are very happy to welcome Reverend Denise Walden Gwen.
Blessings, everyone. It is an honor and a blessing to be with you on this evening. I felt very honored to get the call to help ground us in this lens of racial justice and equity around this work. And it's very interesting because I have found myself, some of you may know or recognize me from the tragic, horrific violence that we saw in Buffalo around May 14th. And I have been wrestling with, what do I think about when I think about racial justice and equity? Like, what is the lens that I come from when I think about this? And in all honesty, I've really gotten to a place, family, where I have to say, we can't get to racial justice until we address this concept of equity. There is a huge equity gap across our nation. And as you all just got to hear Joe speak, and I missed some of that, but I am familiar with the Poor People's Campaign and what they represent. And I know here in Buffalo, New York, we've been working with our Arise committee around fair pay for home care. And until we start really closing the equity gap and putting value and worth in those who see value and worth in taking care of those who need the most in our community, we are truly missing the mark, you all, in a great and significant way, in a way that does us all a dishonor and a disjustice. We have to value those who value the people that we love enough to say that we will take care of them. We will show up with them, right? We will meet the needs of them. And we're not doing that. And the truth is, when we look at the racial lens of it, a good majority of those folks who are in those positions are people of color. There are people of color who are already struggling to even take care of themselves and their own needs, but they're also willing to take on job opportunities to take care of others, and we're not making sure that they're taken care of well. And so if we want to start to address racial justice and equity in our community, we have to look at this lens of equity and ask ourselves, what does it look like to be equitable? What does it look like to make sure that we're taking care of those who take care of others? And not just in things like home care, right? I often think about in my own world of organizing. For those organizers are some of the most overworked, underpaid individuals I have ever met in my life, but we are tasked with doing the work to carry out the campaigns to make the very change that we all know is needed. And we're tasked with that without being given what we need to be okay. So as a woman of color, as a woman of faith, who is a woman of color, right, that does this work, how do I continue to fight the injustices that plague my community when I'm also fighting within my own life against those same injustices, but yet I'm tasked to show up and build relationship and build community well so that we can organize in a way that will bring forth change. That's not righteous, and it doesn't even make sense. And so we need to start to look at that. After Pastor Cook called me today, I was reflecting on spiritual nourishment and how to address this. And the only place that I could go back to was the Beatitudes. I'm of the Christian faith tradition. And in my faith tradition, we have the Beatitudes, right? And we study the Beatitudes in the Bible. And it's blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are they that mourn. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are they who do hunger and thirst after righteousness. Blessed are the merciful. Blessed are the pure in heart. And that made me think a lot about this concept again of racial justice and equity. And the truth is, justice looks a lot like us closing the equity gap. Justice looks a lot like us making sure that we are doing the work to take care of the people who love on and take care of people, and doing that work well and unapologetically. Justice looks like us not having people fighting for justice, but stuck in the same unjust systems that they're fighting against. That's what justice looks like. And so until we get to a place that we are truly addressing that gap, again, we are missing the mark. But I'm grateful for all of you on this call this evening, because it tells me that that is work that we are willing to do. And I'm praying that we are here to do that work together and to receive that in a real way, and to sit with that in our faith traditions and wrestle within, what does that look like? How do I need to show up? Where do I fall in that? Where do I have some influence and some power in that? And then making some decisions about what you showing up in that in a real way looks like. I'm grateful for the Poor People's Campaign, and I'm grateful for the campaign to fight for home health workers, right? But it's bigger than that. And there's no easy fix, but there is a fix, right? We know that poverty is a policy choice. We know that it's intentional. And so how do we build up what we need to build up to start to fight for equity and not just what we see as justice. And I believe that we have a good start to that. And so my plan was to not keep you long and not to do the typical pastor thing and have 5 closings. And so I just challenge you all to reflect on the Beatitudes, to remember those who are closest to the heartbeat of the divine, and then to continue to be committed to being in the work together of building equitable communities so that we can truly, truly, truly achieve what we know to be racial justice. And so I thank you all for your time on this evening. And I pray that all goes well in conversation. And thank you all for just making space for me.
Thank you so much, Reverend Walden Glenn. Again, very wonderful, beautiful words and poignant for today. We really have to truly get back to what is equitable and also what is, just and right for us as a whole, as a community. And I say that as a community as a whole, regardless of your geographic region that you belong to. We are one community. So thank you so much.
And just to say that Denise Walden Glenn is the executive director of Voice Buffalo, just so you all know. So great. Thanks, Denise.
So we also are going to be joined, we're going to have members of the labor community who will speak to us tonight about, again, several pieces of legislation that are in front of the legislature. And it all really revolves around wages, safe staffing, working conditions. I thought we'd start out with a larger conversation around wages and then filter into kind of like more specific pieces of the conversation around home health care, around hospital staffing, around securing wages against theft. So starting from the broader perspective, the bill that's happening this legislative session, we have the Raise Up New York campaign, which is advocating for a piece of legislation that will be raising the minimum wage in New York State up to $21.25 throughout upstate New York by the year 2026 in Long Island and Westchester, and 2027 in other places in New York State. And so the coalition is comprised of about 30 organizations, almost 30 organizations, some of which we have on the call tonight. But I want to start with a really broad kind of participatory question and then bring it in so that we can all talk about specific pieces of legislation. So I know Emma from the Worker Justice Center, Emma Krejci, is part of that coalition. I know Alana is part of that coalition. 1199 is part of that coalition. So I just wanted to hear just your perspectives on the Raise Up New York, Raise Wage New York campaign. Why you think it's necessary, any specifics you may be able to add, and then kind of like the landscape of it for this session. So I think I'll start with Emma, because you're on the top of my screen, and then I'll throw it to Alana.
Sure. I'm happy to talk. I was actually in Albany today. We had a lobby day on this piece of legislation. For those of you who don't know me, I'll just briefly introduce myself. My name is Emma Krejci. I'm the Director of Advocacy, Outreach, and Education at the Worker Justice Center of New York. We are a legal services and advocacy group that works primarily with low-wage immigrant workers across upstate New York. I'm based in the Hudson Valley in Ulster County. But we work with folks, all the way from Westchester up to the North Country out to Buffalo. A lot of our work is direct service oriented, but we recognize the limits of the systems that we're working within to try to advance workers' rights. So legislative advocacy is a key component of our work. And I will just share in the chat a little bit more of our broader legislative and budget priorities for this session. But on the minimum wage, like I said, I was up in Albany today on this bill. There is, I think, a lot of traction around raising the minimum wage. We got a really positive response from legislators. You know, as you all know, we are in the worst inflation crisis in 40 years. The last time we saw legislation on the minimum wage was now 10 years ago, and that was around the Fight for 15. Which was, you know, a massive achievement. But what we're facing now is the fact that many parts of the state, downstate in particular, are stuck at 15. And those of us who live upstate haven't even gotten to $15 an hour yet. And at this point, $15 an hour is not worth what it was. And every day that we don't address this crisis, folks are losing ground, right? And we did see in the governor's State of the State address that and in her executive budget that she does want to raise it. However, the legislation that we are pushing forward in this campaign, I'll drop as soon as I can. If somebody else has it on hand, please drop it in the chat. The Ramos and Joyner bill. Here, I've got it. The bill numbers. This is different because it doesn't just aim to index the minimum wage to inflation as the governor proposes, but it aims to catch us up to 21-25 by 2027 across the state, and then index the minimum wage increases in perpetuity to inflation and worker productivity. So this, you know, I think will probably be obvious to many of you why this is so critical right now. There was such a crisis among the communities that at least our organization works with during the pandemic around unemployment, which I'll talk about shortly. And so we saw such an incredible mutual aid response coming forth out of our communities, much of it faith-based and led by faith groups. And the thing is, it hasn't really let up, right? The pandemic is over, at least the unemployment crisis is over, but the inflation and cost of living crisis has just gotten worse. So the bread lines, the soup kitchens, the food pantries, the request for rental assistance, it has gone it's just been absolutely unrelenting, right? For those of in our communities who are most in need and most vulnerable. So the need for this is urgent. There are some other real limitations to the governor's proposal on minimum wage, which Alana can address some of those, and I'll let others speak on this. But this is why we're working so hard to make sure legislators are on board with this bill, the Raise Up bill, to understand the importance of getting us beyond the really limited increase that the governor is proposing.
Thank you, Emma. And Alana, did you want to weigh in?
I could share. I actually was gonna, because there's two amazing folks here from SEIU 1199, Kim and Rona, and all of us are sort of in the same mix. I wanted to see if either of you all wanted to say anything related to, I guess, home care and the minimum wage.
Yeah, I will. So, thank you, Alana. Alana's not feeling well, but she's a trooper and she came on anyway. So, yeah, the problem with the minimum wage law that the governor proposed is that it excludes home care workers. And, you know, we fought carrying majority 1199 last year to raise home care workers' salaries $3 above the minimum, and the intent was to keep them at the minimum, keep them $3 above the minimum, that they're not minimum wage workers, they're home care, healthcare workers. And there's such a crisis and a shortage, and to keep them at minimum wage, not recognizing their value, undermines what we're all trying to do. To uplift home care workers and to pay a decent salary so people don't leave and go to Walmart and Amazon. So so it's a big problem. So the governor what she's proposing, we are against. We are working with the coalition, but we spoke to legislators today, and we made it very clear that we were not happy with this, and that we want the minimum wage to go through for all New Yorkers, but we want home care workers not to be redlined, sidelined, ignored by saying that they cannot get any minimum wage increase until everybody in New York City makes that minimum wage of $18. So we are not happy campers. And I think I speak for Alana. I know I speak for Kim Gibson from Buffalo, who came and really doesn't have that much. I know she's working on a lot of things. So Kim, I know you don't have that much time. So if you wanted to say anything.
Well, I will just throw in a couple things because I'm in the new organizing department. So I work with people that don't have a union yet at 1199 and help them form a union. In upstate New York, when the wage rate went up to 1620, even when it went up to 1520, workers came back to home care. They came back up here. It's too early to get like real numbers, but we have been we have a nonprofit organization called Healthcare Workers Rising, which is made exclusively of home care workers. And our membership, we could see our membership coming back because they were starting to get paid a more decent rate, better than they could make at other places. It's still not the most competitive rate if you're looking at other places of business that pay more per hour. The fact of the matter is, when minimum wage goes up, mainly the places that can afford to do this are the McDonald's and the Walmarts, like Rona said. It's the healthcare, it's the care economy that can't really afford to do it because Medicare rates are not high enough. And because they have these for-profit money grabbers in the middle, long-term managed care and agencies. So I think, when we're talking about our priorities, and Dennis can maybe help with this, we really need to just be better stewards of our tax dollars. Where is it going? When minimum wage on October 1st, everybody was supposed to get a $2 raise. If you were a home care worker that was lucky enough to already make over $15.20, you didn't get a raise. You didn't get a raise, you didn't get a pandemic bonus, and you felt disrespected, right? And according to the governor, that money went out of the budget. It went to the system. It didn't make it to its intended targets. It didn't make it to the workers who deserved it, and worked really hard for it. So we just need to force the government to realize that they're investing money, but not getting enough return out of it. And the return is really caring for their constituents, right? And caring for the people who care for them. Pretty much that's all I got to say. The system's messed up, and it's hard for workers with a union, but it's impossible for workers without it.
And I would just add, and then maybe Alana could talk about the fair pay fight, but I would just add that the other proposal that is really going to hurt consumers who need care is the proposal that basically takes consumer-directed PAs who take care of many times severely disabled consumers who must have care in order to live in the community. And the budget proposal takes those workers out of wage parity. And as Kim said, they're not even in wage parity. They're already much lower upstate New York and outside of New York City. But it would basically mean a $3.22 cut in Westchester, Long Island for CDPAP home care workers. In New York, it would mean a $4 cut. And we have a hard enough time, they have a hard enough time finding home care workers. Sometimes the job is very challenging and takes a lot of skill. And so we can imagine how difficult and how painful and how inhuman that it will be, because consumers will not be able to hire workers when they're paying them $4 less. And for what reason are they paying them $4 less? Only to, I don't know, give the money somewhere else, but it is really it's really another huge problem and a slap in the face. And so, you could hear in my voice that I'm passionate, I'm angry, and we're gonna fight back.
And can you discuss or lean into a little bit more of the dynamic about the landscape for the bill this session? So how is it faring? Who are your champions in the Senate and the Assembly? And where are any barriers or obstacles?
You want me to do that, Rona? I can do a little bit. Hi, everybody. This is Ilana Berger, she, her. I'm with Hand in Hand, which is a sister organization to the National Domestic Workers Alliance. And I help coordinate the New York Caring Majority. So yeah, so Fair Pay for Home Care, which Kim and Rona both referenced, came about a few years ago. We've been working on it for a while. The goal of the language entirely is to raise home care worker pay to 150% of minimum wage, noting that it is skilled healthcare work. It involves medical care, wound care, toileting, bathing, it's lifting, it's being a person's sole companion. And so we believe it, and it is, oh my, I gotta plug in my computer, shoot. New York has like the biggest home care worker shortage in the country. So if we don't pay the workforce better, we're going to lose the workforce and people are going to go without care. So Fair Pay for Home Care would be 150% of minimum wage, and it would address the issue that Kim talked about, ensuring that the money went directly to home care workers and home care providers, not private insurance companies who are stealing lots of our taxpayer dollars. So last year, or the past couple of years, Fair Pay for Home Care has been sponsored by Senator Rachel May and Assembly Member Dick Gottfried, who is she was the chair of the Aging Committee. He was the chair of the Health Committee in the Assembly. As referenced last year, we did win a $3 an hour raise above minimum wage for home care workers, did not do anything to ensure that our taxpayer dollars meant for care all got down to provide home care. Much of it is exiting the system and into insurance executive pockets. So we came back this year to try to get even more money for home care workers. There was a lovely rally today where I heard I was at home. I have COVID. This is why I'm not feeling well. But I could hear everybody chanting "Más dinero, más dinero," and it was lovely. But also to fix the way that the money is getting sucked out of the system. So this year, because Dick Gottfried retired, Amy Pollan, who's the new health chair, has taken over as sponsor. So we came into this expecting somewhat like last year, where we weren't really mentioned in the executive budget, other than at last year at this time, the governor had been talking about giving bonuses for workers. And we were clear that bonuses, a $300 bonus or a small bonus, is not enough to stem the hemorrhaging of workers out of this workforce because of the low pay. And we ended up, despite not being in the executive budget originally, by the end, both the Senate and the Assembly were incredibly supportive. We made it into both the Senate and the Assembly one House budgets, the full amount that we had asked for Fair Pay for Home Care. And I think I want to say last year, and what we hope to see again in this place, in this sort of country right now where everything is so divisive and polarized and toxic, this issue is so universally supported. So the coalition that we came into the budget with last year and this year includes workers and employers, the disabled community, older adults, Republicans, Democrats, rural, urban, suburban New York. We literally have everyone. It was this sort of gift wrapped package to the governor, like a proposal that offers a 2-for-1 return on investment, where the money paid to the home care workforce would come back, create more jobs, more revenue for our state. It would keep people safe in their homes and communities. It would give a 90% woman, 80% person of color workforce that's been paid poverty wages, a living wage. There's all these great things. So we were a little disappointed that the governor didn't do more last year. And then, so this year coming into the budget, we were surprised at how much the executive budget was actually an attack on this workforce. And so we were really heartened to see our legislative champions out there with us again today. Very much hope again to see the One House budgets reflect what we want to win. And I do want to say, you know, it's walking a little bit of a tricky line to say, you know, home care is a high-skilled healthcare job that should be paid as such. It should be above minimum wage without in any way denigrating minimum wage work. We want to see the floor raised for all workers. We're part of the Raise Up Coalition. We want to see the minimum wage for all New Yorkers go up. And we want to ensure that, again, home care is paid as sort of a health care job. So we're hopeful that our friends in the legislature will continue to push us forward. But we have a lot of work to do because we're starting at sort of a negative in terms of what the governor has put out in her budget.
And in terms
Happy
of,
Hochul.
and in terms of raise the wage, we met with joint Assemblywoman Joyner, and in the Senate we met with Senator Jessica Ramos's chief of staff, and explained to them how it excludes home care workers, and specifically said in the budget. So, you know, I'll just say, I know I'm gonna have to go, but I would say that February 28th, we're gonna also be up in Albany, and we're going to bring 1199 and non-union consumer directed workers, and hopefully other organizations will join us up there. I know that you have a lobby day on the 28th, but as Alana says, this is a issue that affects all of us. If you've been lucky enough that you haven't had to have a loved one cared by someone else, or it will affect us all if we're lucky enough to live that long. So I really, you know, I appreciate what Peter Cook does. It's nice to meet you, Rashida. I appreciate, you know, all of you fighting for social justice. I was at last year's forum, and I just appreciate the goodness that you have, and your willingness to fight for others to have a better life. So I'm gonna have to go soon. We're leaving Mr. Dennis Short here, you know, when to see if he can give you a little more idea of what else we're fighting for in 1199 for this budget, if you have time.
Thank you so much, Rona, and Alana. Thank you so much for joining us today. You know, I totally sympathize with you with COVID. I wish that I wish it very mild and very quick.
Paxlovid.
And thank you so much,
Thank
Emma
you.
and Kim. Thank you so much, and it's very nice meeting you. So I do want to get in Dennis before we head over to Greg. And I know I see Greg's driving, so I want you to be safe when you're able to speak. But Dennis, did you have anything you wanted to add?
So thanks, Rashida. You know, just a couple of things. I think that you know, as 1199 and you know, I think NISNA probably the same. You know, as we think about where we are right now, you know, coming through the third year of the pandemic, and what that has meant for healthcare workers who sort of been through it, who got sick, who most of them stuck it out. But the fact is, you know, there is a workforce crisis in healthcare, and obviously Rona talked about what's going on in home care, but it's also affecting, you know, our hospitals and nursing homes and other sectors. And so, you know, when we think about this year's budget, it really is about making sure that there is the funding, there's the Medicaid funding that institutions need to make sure that they have the ability to pay workers wages and benefits that will stop the exodus and bring workers back into the system. And you know, the Medicaid budget, for the most part, you know, it's basically been since the Great Recession in 2008. there's essentially been a freeze on Medicaid rates, both for hospitals and nursing homes. And obviously, folks talked about the impact of inflation. It's been 15 years of medical inflation, and the rates simply haven't kept up. And that's, and it's made it much more difficult for employers to actually compete. In the nursing home sector, workers can take jobs that pay just as much as a nursing home job with a lot less stress, and they're leaving, and hospital workers as well. The trauma that many of them went through during the pandemic, they're looking for other opportunities where they can make the same amount with less stress. So these facilities really do need to have a significant Medicaid increase to cover the cost. In the hospital sector, the 1199 and the industry have asked for a 10% Medicaid increase to try to close that gap. On the nursing home side, it's a 20% increase in Medicaid. The executive budget has called for a 5% across the board increase. But just like in home care, where the minimum wage proposal actually in some ways takes it away from home care workers, the governor's proposal takes some funding away, particularly from the hospitals. There's a program called the 340B drug pricing program that has been in effect for many years, that is a real significant source of funding for the safety net and academic medical centers. And that program is essentially going away. And what the governor's budget basically says is that the increase in hospital rates will cover that loss of funding that many of them will see from the 340B change. So yes, there's a 5% increase, but at the same time, there's a reduction in funding that hospitals are going to have to deal with. So, we're really focused on making sure there's a significant increase in funding for hospitals and safety net hospitals in particular, and the nursing home sector to be able to stabilize the industry and make sure they can compete with the Walmarts and the other industries out there that it's much less stressful work, and we need to be able to bring more workers into the system and keep the ones we have. So that's the union's kind of big priorities as we go into the budget cycle.
Thank you so much, Dennis. And it's such a perfect pairing for 1199 and your platforms to lead into NYSNA and its work. But we wish you luck, and
Thank
very
you.
much we're supportive of the workers and everything that you guys are fighting for, higher wages, fair pay. And thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to learning more about your platform. I believe Maurice sent over your legislative priorities, so I'm gonna make sure that everyone has a copy to all of the links, here, so everyone who attended, and those links will go into the video for tonight. Thank you again.
Okay, just wanted to say thank you to Greg for all his work. Also, I haven't met him, but I know the nurses are fighting, so I'll try and stay on as long as I can to hear you.
Awesome. Well, with that, Greg, thank you so much, and welcome to the Labor and Wages seminar. So Greg, you were working with NYSNA, and we're just asking or trying to see your legislative platform for the year, and any other things that you're working on that we can get involved in, or you want people to know about.
Well, thank you everyone for having me on, and thank you for being patient as I'm driving. I was just leaving another event, but happy to be here. And again, thank you for making the space to talk about this very important issue that affects not just healthcare workers, but I think we believe the community as a whole. throughout the state. We are, without any doubt, in a healthcare crisis, and I think every healthcare worker, from nurses to PCTs, and in every aspect of care, are seeing the consequences of taking funding away from the healthcare system. And I'm just going to echo what Dennis was saying around funding. For NISNA, it's been one of our top priorities for years to increase funding for all of the safety net hospitals throughout the state, to make sure that each hospital have enough funding to provide better patient care. Our healthcare workers, nurses, and healthcare workers providers in general are giving their 110% to make sure that patients are being taken care. But without the proper funding, this task is just it becomes more difficult as we go. And throughout the last 3 years of the pandemic, we all, everyone in the community have seen that. This year, as we enter into a new phase, for years we worked on passing the staffing bill, and last year we have a good frame of a good bill that we passed through the legislature, the governor signed it, and as it's being implemented, this year we're going into the budget season to push for funding, more funding for safety net hospitals. We are going into this budget season to make sure that the state understand that this staffing bill has to be enforced and implemented. And for that, they're still going to need a lot more funding. So the Dennis point on Medicaid reimbursement, it's totally something that we are advocating and we are supporting across the board as we begin to fight for enforcing the staffing bill. We know that increasing funding is going to be super important for every facility throughout the state. Obviously, union contracts and organizing, as we're focusing on the budget priority, union contracting organizing is going to be part of our fight because we know that without good representation, it's just going to be more tough to fight this employer and to make sure that they are being held accountable. So as we prepare to do a lobby day at the end of this month and target elected officials that we work with and the ones that even we don't work, to make sure that they understand that this is a crisis that everybody needs to support. We are also in different contract fight throughout the state. Many of you heard about the strike nurses in the city, and we have nurses in the North Country and Western New York under contract campaign currently that we are organizing and supporting and doing a lot in district meetings to make sure that they understand how important it is to make sure that safety net hospitals and healthcare providers throughout the state are receiving the what they need to provide patient care. And one thing that we really are advocating for and making sure that everybody understand that it's not just pay, but it's also the benefits that comes with it, and what healthcare workers call nurses mainly call for safe staffing is the dignity and respect that every patient deserve, right? Every patient is a VIP, as many of you heard in one of our chants throughout the state when we do pickets and strike. It's to make sure that every patient receives the quality of care that they deserve. And the only way that we're really going to accomplish this is by doing a lot of organizing, a lot of union contract, and pushing for a budget that increase reimbursement and to make sure that all of the safety net hospitals throughout the state receive more funding. So as we prepare to do different, we're going to have a lobby day at the end of this month, and we are working on making sure that all of the different partners and coalition throughout the state know and our labor allies understand and work together to make sure that every elected official, every senator, every assembly person see the need to support the increase in funding for every hospital throughout the state. So that's pretty much what we are focusing on. There is going to be a lot of enforcement actions in different parts of the state as we are looking forward to implement the staffing bill. The Department of Health already have those staffing ratios. They are posted, they are public, and it's on all of us. The community, it's on the unions and elected officials to make sure that they are being held accountable and that these staffing ratios are exactly what is mandated in the law. The Department of Health is posting them, and the hospitals are making sure we are pushing them to make sure that they are following those ratios.
Thank you so much, Craig. And I do have one quick question, or one follow-up question. Are you encountering any resistance to your bills, and if so, where?
We are having different places. So different part of the state is different. One good example that I can just give right now is EZMC in Western New York, Buffalo. Did send their ratios to the State Department of Health right when they were supposed to, but they intentionally left 3 of the most understaffed units that we know of. They left it out when we asked them why those units were not sent to the Department of Health, why those units were not public. They try to say that the Department of Health didn't request them, when we know that by law they were supposed to send those ratios. But again, through organizing, through pushing, bargaining, we keep demanding and keep asking why wasn't those ratios sent, and when they were going to send that, and they end up sending those ratios to the Department of Health so they can be public. Keep in mind that those 3 units that they didn't send, the staffing, the ratios in those units were so bad. The one nurse was taking care of up to 41 and 45 patients per shift, which is totally out of line, totally insane, and really dangerous for all the patients in that unit. So we seeing some of their tactics. They're trying to work around, trying to find ways to delay sending those ratios, and to evade any question or any request of information that we are sending. But at the end of the day, I think it's being a community effort, it's being a union effort, members pushing back. We've been able to hold them accountable initially, and that's why we're working with different community allies and elected officials to keep holding them accountable. So we can make sure that they are follow the ratios that they agree based on the state law. Well, we have had different other places in the North Country where the employer requests sort of like extension, which is not clear in the law, whether they have, it was not a specific extension that they can request, but they did it with the idea to delay those ratios to be sent to the Department of Health and become public, and ultimately delaying the enforcement. But we're pushing back, we're organizing, we are there to make sure that they are doing the right thing, and we're gonna continue to do so.
Thank you so much, Craig, and thank you for all of your hard work and your organizing, supporting nurses throughout the state. They're the ones who support us when we're not at our best and in need. So thank you so much for supporting them.
Absolutely. thank you for listening.
Absolutely. So we've heard about the legislative asks and issues that are coming up this session around home health care and our nurses and healthcare workers. And so we're going to shift to other folks who also help to keep New York us going, and those who have been typically excluded from receiving help when they, were not allowed to receive unemployment, but have kept pushing. And, Emma Krejci at the Worker Justice Center is a wonderful advocate, and the Worker Justice Center just does amazing work for the immigrant community in New York State. I know the one based in Kingston very well, and the work that they do, that they did around driver's licenses and green light, but also just the work they do in uplifting and providing a voice for the immigrant community, the documented and undocumented here in New York. So with that, I'm going to throw this over to Emma Krejci to talk about the Unemployment Bridge Fund, which was formerly the Excluded Worker Fund.
Great. Hi, everyone, again. Just before I jump into the Unemployment Bridge program, I am going to drop our legislative and budget priorities document into the chat. This doesn't have bill numbers yet because we haven't updated them, and they were really late coming out this year. But you can see that we're supporting a whole range of different bills, both worker justice bills and immigrant justice bills, and legislative and budget priorities rather. So I certainly invite you to engage with that. But I am going to share my screen to, actually, before I share my screen, I'm going to drop a few other documents in the chat so I don't have to keep toggling back and forth as I go. And these are all related to the Unemployment Bridge program. So the Worker Justice Center of New York, can you all see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So the Worker Justice Center is part of the Fund Excluded Workers Coalition, which I know that many of you are maybe familiar with because of the work that we did in response to the pandemic, where we found hundreds of thousands of workers were excluded from any kind of unemployment relief, which created tremendous pressure, in particular on undocumented immigrants who were unable to get many kinds of aid. And so while there were many categories of excluded workers that traditionally don't get UI payments, such as freelancers, some of the federal government relief programs at PUA, for example, were able to provide that kind of assistance during the major unemployment crisis of the pandemic. So we fought as part of the Excluded Worker Coalition, the Fund Excluded Workers Coalition, for a relief program specifically for those who remained excluded from any sort of benefits. And we had a tremendous victory in 2021 with the creation of the Excluded Workers Fund. That was a $2.1 billion fund that provided relief payments, one-time payments to those who had suffered employment loss during the first year of the pandemic. It was tremendous. It was a tremendous success for workers who were actually able to access it. But what we saw was that the need was tremendous, especially in upstate communities where access to assistance for applying to the fund was limited. We saw many folks left out because the money evaporated so quickly. So within 9 weeks of opening the fund, the DOL actually had to close it. So many of the intended beneficiaries were not able to access assistance. So it was kind of a bittersweet victory. I'll have to look for it, but there's been some really amazing and powerful research done on the impact that the fund had for folks that were able to use it to pay, mostly pay off bills and debt that have been accumulated over the course of the pandemic and really get back on their feet. But what this all taught us was that, first of all, it revealed all of these gaping holes in our social safety net, right? We learned that there were actually a lot more people besides undocumented immigrants that were unable to access UI. And in fact, that's part of the reason that this fund got depleted so quickly, is because it absorbed a lot more folks than we even realized would have a need for this kind of assistance. And what we now understand is that we need to really find a permanent fix to our unemployment social safety net. So last year we went to the legislature, both asking for a replenishment of the Excluded Workers Fund, but also proposing something new, a permanent unemployment program for excluded workers. We didn't get too far with those demands last year. It was a really frustrating and difficult, challenging year, but we saw incredible grassroots engagement around this idea of an unemployment program, a permanent fund. So this year we have come back with some changes to the legislation and a rebrand. We're calling this now the Unemployment Bridge Program, and you will see there's a one-pager in the chat that you can peruse as I go through this. And if I'm getting too in the weeds, please, Rashida, feel free to stop me, but there's some really important points that I think we have to cover. And then if I need to sort of move at a quicker pace, just let me know. And I'm also
the weeds are good, Emma. The weeds are good.
You know, like I mentioned, there are now within this new framework for the Unemployment Bridge program, we're including several different categories of workers. So we're really looking beyond undocumented individuals, although they are still a key kind of constituency that we're looking to cover with this program. But in addition to immigrants who don't have work authorization, we're looking at freelancers and self-employed workers, including folks like street vendors, writers, creative types, as well as domestic workers and day laborers who are often paid in cash. So some of those folks may be immigrants, they may or may not have work authorization, but we're looking at them as a kind of special category because those are such contingent forms of labor where people, even though maybe in theory they should be able to be eligible for UI, their work history is often so hard to document that it functionally makes them ineligible. So we have the first three categories, again, are freelancers and self-employed workers, domestic worker and day laborers, and then immigrants without work authorization. And then lastly, we expanded the eligibility to people who are in reentry. So that includes folks that are leaving incarceration and also immigrant detention. And the idea is that this would provide them with an on-ramp during that reentry period as they are seeking employment. So they have some kind of support system in place during that reentry period. This is also premised on the understanding that while incarcerated and detained, people are generally speaking working, right? Sometimes earning as little as $1 a day, working in detention centers and in prisons. So there is a really, important analysis here around the unseen labor of prisoners and of immigrant detainees that is important to acknowledge, but also just a really practical understanding of what it takes as folks re-enter and aim to get reestablished. So this is another important category of workers that we're trying to cover here within the Unemployment Bridge Fund program, I should say. Any questions so far? This is just broadly speaking. And obviously you can see here that we're talking about folks that earn less than $56,000 a year. And this is the median income for workers in New York State. So we're not talking about, high earning consultants and those sorts of self-employed folks, but really people that are more vulnerable to becoming unhoused, to facing food insecurity when they face loss of income. All right, I have this slide.
Can I ask a very basic question? I'm pretty sure you covered this, but I just want to. It's the same group and the same coalition as as few as fund excluded workers. It's that you have
Yeah,
collectively decided. It's not like there's been a split and there's different groups on
no,
different.
that's right. Yeah, that's really a good question. No, we're the same coalition. We are incorporating new coalition members, and as we broaden the scope of the coverage for this proposed program, we are, we've been engaging a lot with, folks working on reentry issues, with freelancers, and trying to really understand those issues and bring these constituencies together.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, no, it was a really good question. I think I'm gonna probably skip the next slide because I think, you all know how, I think you probably heard before all the talking points about how much undocumented folks contribute in the form of taxes. There's still a lot of education that has to happen amongst the public and among legislators about how much undocumented folks, incarcerated folks, and cash earners contribute to our economy. I think with freelancers, we are getting just a little bit of pushback from some legislators with this idea that freelancers don't pay into UI or a program like UI, so why should they benefit? I think it's incredibly short-sighted and really does not reflect an understanding of how much labor is increasingly contingent, right? And it's been interesting as we've been working with the press on this, because so many people who are journalists working in the news media have worked as freelancers. So I've had journalists come to interview me on this bill, and they immediately gravitate toward this issue because they have all their own horror stories about what it means to work as a freelancer in an industry that is increasingly relying on contingent workers, right? Without that kind of job security. So in terms of how this program would work, and I just want to emphasize that this is not an add-on to UI. It's not an update to UI. It is a separate parallel program that would fill the gaps that folks fall through in our current UI system. But we do try to borrow from kind of like elements of our current UI system and elements of the Excluded Workers Fund. So it's separate from the Excluded Workers Fund, it's separate from UI, but it kind of combines or takes lessons from both. So the eligibility requirements mirror state unemployment benefits. So folks, in order to be eligible, except for, of course, those who have been recently released from incarceration or detention, we're not including any kind of work history documentation there, but for other folks, they will have to have worked for at least 3 of the last 12 calendar months before the month of unemployment and earned at least $4,050. The documentation requirements would be similar to the Excluded Workers Fund, and the payments would be, depending on whether it was full or partial unemployment, would be between $800 and $1,200 a month for up to 6 months. Again, this is not like an ongoing payment. It's meant to be a type of assistance during a period of unemployment, helping people to get back on their feet. And all these obviously is not, this is $800 to $1,200 a month is not going to cover all your expenses, but it may help keep a roof over your head and food on the table and help people get through some of those periods of difficulty. So the program, this is just a little bit of a breakdown. And I dropped a report in the chat from the Immigration Research Initiative about the sort of, the costs and the benefits. And then there's an additional slide on the regional impact here. And just to kind of give you a sense of the proportionality of which groups of folks would be covered. And of course, when we talk about there's a total of 750,000 people that would be protected by this program, that's accounting for the fact that not all of those people will be unemployed at a given point in time. So the fact that not everyone will necessarily apply, we're looking at an uptake, we estimate, of about 30,000 people. That would be the average number of anticipated recipients. And then the budget ask that we're looking at is around 500 million annually, at least for this first year. And that's something that and I, again, don't want to get too much in the weeds, but we're trying to make this bill revenue neutral by tying it to a digital ad tax, which I can say more about if people are really interested, but that's always, of course, a point of contention and concern for legislators. This is some of our regional data, which breaks down by area of the state about how many people would be covered from each of the major categories of workers that we've included in the program, and shows what kind of a economic boost it would be to the region. And of course, these are folks that are not putting money into savings. They're not, putting the money into offshore accounts, right? This is money that's going right back into our local economy. It's being used to purchase food, pay rent, buy school supplies, clothing, basic consumer goods. So similar to many of the arguments around the importance of raising the wage, these are precisely the kinds of expenditures that will boost the local economy. So I think I'm going to pause there, and I'm happy to open it up to questions around our strategy. Obviously this is a big ask. It's, economically speaking, it's far less money than we were asking for with the unemployment bridge, with the Excluded Workers Fund. But obviously this is something that we want to see, in perpetuity and become permanent. So it is, it would be the first of its kind in the country. There are other states that have and are looking at ways to include undocumented folks in unemployment relief programs. But I think this would be the most ambitious and wide, sort of would have the largest, most widespread protection, I guess.
Talia.
Hand up.
Yeah. So you probably said this, and I got so excited that I missed it. But for undocumented folks, how do they prove that they have worked, given all the issues around documentation? How does that work?
Yeah, well, it really varies. And we saw this when so our organization was one among many groups that provided application assistance. So we were really in the nitty gritty in the trenches with folks. And there were people who could not get their proofs together within the very short time frame that the fund was open. So there were certainly some barriers for certain individuals. Some of those barriers were around identity documentation, and some of them were around work history documentation. But many, many, many people were able to produce that evidence essentially within, pretty much immediately. So many undocumented folks, of course, do file taxes, have tax returns that they can provide as part of their proof. Many do not. A lot of people are paid with pay stubs, some are not. But the EWF had some very flexible proof requirements, and it was kind of like a point system. It was similar conceptually to how we went about the driver's license documentation. The approach was similar. So there were ways of showing, like if you had bank records of, I believe, regular deposits combined with other forms of proof, things like text message exchanges when you're working as a day laborer, so it becomes more and more difficult. I'm not going to say it's always easy necessarily for folks to provide those necessary proofs, but with the EWF, we were able to really explore creatively about the kinds of proofs that the DOL was willing to accept. And I will say, because there's been a lot of talk about UI fraud, that they did not identify any kind of widespread fraud with the EWF. And so that, unfortunately, I think has kind of like cast a little bit of a shadow over conversations about extending UI benefits. But we saw nothing of the sort with the EWF in the way that, UI, and even with those UI cases, it was really like, it was like very isolated. They had, of course, a large impact, but it was not like everyday people committing fraud. It was these organized crime rings that were very, very sophisticated. So anyway, but those are kind of like narrative challenges we sometimes face, or political challenges that we face, but nothing that should bar us from moving forward.
Thank you so much, Emma. And thank you for the work of this. It's terrific.
And I will also look for that Urban Institute. It's a joint study by the Urban Institute and Immigration Research Initiative on the impact of the Excluded Workers Fund. And I think it really helps put in perspective what these kinds of social safety net programs can really do for people concretely and materially. So I definitely encourage you all to check that out as well. And IRI in general has done some just incredible research that has helped to inform our thinking around this proposal.
I see a hand up, Shauna Williams.
Hi, yes, thank you. I'm here on behalf of State Healthcare. My voice is a little under the weather. I have a sore throat today just because I'm going through some things. You guys had a lot of nice things to say. I'm not sure if this is like the Q&A type part, but I just want to be clear, you know, we have what we call an equal employment opportunity, which refers to job discrimination. And working for both public and private sectors, I know if someone has 15 employees or less, certain laws don't pertain to their organization. I don't think minimum wage is the problem. I think it is the cost of living. And we really need to address that. So if you're making $30,000 an hour, $30,000 a year, and that breaks down to $14 an hour, you know, that covers some of your bills, you know, in conjunction with rent and also getting to and from work. So I think, you know, you guys had great things to say, but laws and legislation, we have to look at the past in order to go forward. And also we have to make clear if we have a large migrant population that they are familiar with these things, because it gets kind of misconstrued.
Yeah, we work I'm not sure if you were on the call when I introduced myself, but we do work primarily with immigrant workers, and we especially, you know, we have a particular focus on farm workers and rural workers, particularly migrant and immigrant workers. So I'm very familiar with a lot of those challenges, and part of what we face is lack of enforcement of our existing labor laws, right? So if you look at our legislative platform, you'll see that there are a couple of bills that address the enforcement issues, including the SWEAT bill, which I know some of you are involved with, and another bill called the Empire bill. Because we do, in New York, we have some great labor laws on the books, but the crisis of enforcement is real, and the Department of Labor is not sufficiently resourced, and you know, frankly, there isn't enough put into outreach and education and empowerment of low-wage workers who are experiencing violations of the minimum wage laws, of the overtime laws, right? So I know there was a lot of talk about the struggles of union workers, which are so important, because of course we know that like a rising tide lifts all boats. And there are so many workers that are non-union, and even more so immigrant workers who don't have a lot of opportunities to learn about or effectuate their rights. So I think what you point out is really, really critical.
Great. Thank you so much, Emma. Thank you for your question, Shauna. We're going to turn now to the Securing Wages Against Theft, Securing Wages Earned Against Theft Coalition. And I remember advocating with the SWEAT Coalition when I was a grad student at SUNY Albany. And I just know that, you know, the legislation is vital, as Emma was mentioning, to enforcement. So we have a lot of laws and legislation gets passed, but the other side is very crucial, how it's implemented and enforced. And so we are joined by Leah Lotto, who is going to take us through the SWEAT bill, and then give us a landscape about what it's doing this session Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Rashida. That was a perfect introduction of SWET. And also my colleague Joanne Lum has joined. Joanne, I don't know if you're in a position to be able to talk, but I'll get us started, and then I'd love for Joanne to be able to speak also. I'm just laughing because the SWET bill is in year 10, and I don't know when you were a student, Rashida, but we're still going, and this is the year. Yeah, and as Rashida said, SWET is the other end of the spectrum of making wages a reality. We can raise the wages as much as we want, but if the wage laws are not enforced, they don't mean anything. So SWET, the acronym is Securing Wages Earned Against Theft, is a really simple and straightforward bill that gives workers the right and the power to file a lien against an employer who has been stealing their wages. And I am a lawyer, and so then as a lawyer, and that means any violation of New York State's really, really good wage protection laws. So paying under the minimum wage, which is a reality for a lot of workers, that they're paid drastically below what the actual current wage law is. Lots of workers are making $4 or $5 an hour. Thanks, Rashida. It also means not following other provisions of the wage protection laws like overtime, and it's like a very rampant and widespread problem that even though we do have these laws on the books, bosses and employers don't actually follow them. And even when workers organize, workers get attorneys, sue their bosses and win judgments, they're still very frequently denied the actual relief of having their back stolen wages repaid to them through the judicial process, because the bosses use other means to transfer their assets, hide their assets, lie to the courts. And so when it finally gets that you have a paper judgment and you can bring it and try to enforce it against your boss who has stolen your wages, there's no money left at the end of the day. So SWET is a remedy for that. It's a great idea. It's based on a very long-standing legal principle of the mechanics lien, which is something that our society enacted a long time ago, of people who work on buildings could put a lien on the actual building structure that they helped build. And it's a very basic principle of, I'm a worker who built this building, and no one can sell or transfer this building until I get my wages. So it's just expanding that idea that's been in place in our laws for over a century into all workers being able to do that, essentially. And yeah, I don't know, Joanne, if you are able to join in, but I'll just keep going. The SWET Coalition is led by workers. It's led by grassroots worker centers. So maybe basic other things are Senator Ramos is our sponsor in the Senate. Linda Rosenthal is our sponsor in the Assembly. We got the closest to victory in 2019 when we passed both chambers. Hi, Joanne. And then Governor Cuomo vetoed the bill, which was very rough and frustrating. But we've come back. And last year, we also got very close again. We passed the Senate, but did not get through the Assembly. And our biggest enemy, as I know we've been talking about on this call, our biggest opponent is the Hospitality Alliance. So we're always having them on our radar as they do lobby against our bill pretty strongly. But I think, you know, this call has been really, really hopeful and empowering. And I want to have a good note, and then I'll turn it over to Joanne, which is that our bill is like really essential in this moment of workers experiencing such widespread theft of their wages. And we're so close. We're so close. We've passed both chambers 3 years ago, and last year also came very close. And as we've talked about with some of the other bills, we are absolutely revenue neutral in the terms that people talk about in Albany. And we also say that it's actually revenue generating, because the State Department of Labor, part of the labor law is that they can collect additional fines and penalties from bosses who steal from their workers. The workers get their full recovery, but then the DOL can also collect more money from them that goes into the state coffers. So SWET is actually generating revenue for the state and would in no way be a negative in the budget line, which is another important thing. And maybe, Joanne, maybe I'll stop there, and if you want to take over.
Yeah, thank you, Leah, for that intro. I just wanted to add from the point of view of a lot of us who are organizing the workers. So there are a number of workers centers, workers organizations, unions involved in the SWET coalition. And we see, just speaking from ours, the National Mobilization Against Sweatshops in the Lower East Side, every day we see workers of all different industries, delivery workers, nail salon, home care workers, construction workers with wage theft problems. We've even met young workers who work in gyms, or I met a social worker who worked in a hospital, now retired, but who also speak of wage theft that they didn't even know they were experiencing. For instance, overtime that they were just asked to work and they didn't realize they, should have been paid overtime. Anyway, it's running rampant, and it's become like the norm in New York State. And in fact, it feels like it's sanctioned by the New York State. Because, for example, in one industry alone, right now we're seeing a ton of home care workers who are working, taking care of disabled elderly people in their homes. And these are people who are Medicaid recipients, and they get home care, some of whom really need 24 hours around the clock. And so we're seeing a ton of home care workers who work 24-hour shifts, and they've done so, for days on end, 3-4 days a week, 5 days a week. Sometimes they get stuck there 6 days a week, then when the replacement doesn't come, for years. They can't sleep at night, and they only get paid for 13 of those 24 hours. So 11 hours for free every day. So between 3 of us worker centers alone, we have filed in the last year more than 1,000 claims at the Department of Labor for wage theft. It's crazy. I mean, this is publicly funded. This is Medicaid money. There are insurance companies, managed care companies involved. And it's just happening left and right. 1199 SU has estimated that $6 billion in wage theft is owed to its membership, home care workers. So it's crazy. And so this hurts not only, it especially hits immigrant and low-wage workers hard, but it also hurts unionized workers. In this case, a lot of the home care workers are unionized workers, but if all these other workers who are trying to unionize or have unionized and are trying to maintain their benefits or increase their benefits, if they have many workers who are not even getting the floor, like there's no floor because minimum wage is supposed to be the minimum, then that means that it affects everybody else. Like since there's no floor, why don't we cut benefits or wages? Why do we need to increase union workers' wages? You know, that's what's happening. And so that's why we feel that SWED is so critical, because it's just about making the labor law enforceable. Because right now it's not. As Leah mentioned, you know, we have so many workers, we've helped them sue in court, they win a federal judgment, and then they can't collect because the employer says, I don't have any money. Because in all that time, they had time to transfer assets and shut down their business and reincorporate under a new name. And then they can say, I have no money. I have no money at the end of the day. And all you're left with is a judgment, a piece of paper. This has happened over and over again, which is really demoralizing to workers who stuck their necks out to you know, organize and to sue their bosses. And it makes them feel like no faith in the law. I mean, the laws are not for them, they feel like. And even when you win in court, you don't win the money. And then it's also emboldening unscrupulous employers to continue doing the same, because you don't have to pay even when you get caught. So this is the nature of things. I mean, now it's like, so anyway, that's why SWET is urgent. It's really, it's destroying so many people's lives.
Thank you so much, Joanne and Leah. And I did have one question, but I want to open it up for others who may have questions first.
Well, this isn't a question, just a point of reinforcement, because this is the, like, wage theft is our, I don't know how to put it, bread and butter. Like, our labor and employment law practice is like the central focus of our organization in many ways, and it's rampant. The other half of my job, besides legislative advocacy, is outreach and community legal education, and wage theft is the hottest topic because so many people, it's totally endemic to low-wage industries across the board, across the state. And it is, I have personal experience filing wage claims with the Department of Labor, getting judgments, and they just sit there for years. And then it's the same company committing wage theft over and over and over again. And there's no way to get payment for these workers. It's absolutely maddening, infuriating, and it's complete and total nonsense that our legislators are not acting on this. The fact that Governor Cuomo vetoed, I mean, he's basically saying, like, oh yeah, we want to have great labor laws, but the instant you try to actually enforce them, like, never mind. And so, you know, when you hear the opposition's arguments, and it's basically like, well, we should just have a free pass to violate the law. So it's just beyond ludicrous that this bill has faced so many barriers. So that's just, my rant is over, but I feel very strongly about that bill.
Peter?
Oh,
Gregory, sorry.
Go ahead, Gregory.
I was just gonna add and echo what Emma, Leah, and Joanna are saying. And years ago, when we started organizing fast food workers to join 515 in a union, and Kim Gibson can also speak to that. She did a lot of basically all the work organizing fast food workers in Western New York 10 years ago. One of the main issues we found was wage theft. It was just happening, and nobody even cared to report because nobody thought that anything can be done. Right, a lot of these laws are on the book, but without enforcement, is like if they are not there, many of the workers that we encounter, you know, really got something through organizing, which is ultimately the key. But at the end of the day, it takes a lot of work to organize. And by the time we were able to find out any solution to wage theft from different employers in different parts of the state, that wage theft was happening in probably 100 other stores in different places by day. So a huge issue to low wage workers everywhere. And even though we have laws on the book, the laws that are supposed to be protecting, again, without enforcement, and going back to what I was saying with the staffing bill at the beginning, we probably have that on the book, but without organizing and pushing, we won't have, we won't accomplish anything. So great work on organizing and doing research, because that's at the end of the day, all of these laws are good. But without us on the ground and pushing, honestly, it doesn't really even matter. So yeah, that's just my 2 cents, supporting like echoing what Leah, Johan, and Emma were saying. Wage theft, a huge issue among low wage workers throughout the state and in general.
Wow. Yeah, maybe just a couple comments and questions here. One comment I would just say is that by the state not enforcing wage theft laws, it basically is another way for the government to use tax dollars to subsidize the negligence of these employers, because we have to, pick up costs that come from people being, strained economically, whether that is housing or food stamps or, a whole bunch of other kinds of things. And so, these people who rip folks off and do wage theft, they become sort of charities of the state. We actually subsidize them by not enforcing the law. So it's rather expensive. And then the other thing is when people aren't working, they're not paying taxes, which also hurts our economy and our state budget and so on. So just lots of financial reasons that you need to be dealing with this. There was a question I had going way back that Rona had mentioned. I don't know if Kim, you would be able to help me with this, but it had to do with consumer directors' wage parity. Is that right? Consumer directors.
Yeah, the consumer direct, I can answer in part. Wage parity doesn't exist in my area of the state. It is a downstate region only right now. Problem, it looks like this governor's budget wants to eliminate wage parity for people who are considered personal attendants. That's consumer directed program. That's the program where I, as a person who needs services, could can hire my own person, right? And generally speaking, these are the legacy sort of disability rights community, right? So these are folks that are going to need care for their whole lives or for a good portion of it, and they want to be able to hire their own attendant and train that attendant and from what I understand, and I don't, Dennis is still on. He may be able to speak to this more because, like I said, it doesn't apply to us in our area of the state right now. We don't have wage parity up here. But they want to take them out of that program, meaning that they would be able to pay their PAs minimum wage.
Wow. And it's just because it's now not through an agency, but it's consumer directed, that allows, that basically means that they could get away with paying a lower wage and not having that subsidized.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And Dennis, I saw you unmute. Oh, there you go.
No, I think again, what Kim said about the consumer direct, that's exactly right. It's folks who hire their own attendants, and and I think that, the fundamental issue with the way the governor's structured the minimum wage piece is that it it essentially excludes certain sectors from the law. So that's there are some issues. The wage parity issue can be a little bit complicated, but I think the main point just to remember about this is that she's intending to exclude a sector of the healthcare workforce, and that's I think that's the cleanest way to think about it. So.
Then one other question, the fair wage campaign that would put workers at $20 and then it would be indexed after that, under that campaign, home care workers would be covered, or would they, like the governor, be excluded from that $20 minimum?
Emma, you're muted, sorry.
I'm not working on the home care campaign, but so maybe somebody else can answer this better. But the problem is that the governor's proposal, I think, as I understand it, would basically stagnate the home care workers' wage. It would reverse the win that they just got, which was an increase over the minimum wage, and require that the rest of the state catch up to 8, which under her proposal, I think would take several years for workers to get up to the $18 minimum wage. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but no, it doesn't exclude home care workers, but there's some additional demands of home care workers that we want to make sure don't get reversed under the governor's proposal. Did I get that right? Home care worker folks? I don't know if you're still engaged.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. My cat is having issues here today. Really serious issues. I don't know what it is. The home care worker wage parity that we are not wage parity, but the increases in their minimum rates that we won keep them up $3 above minimum wage, which is at least a reason for them to continue the job. What most people don't realize about home care work, unless you have a union, you don't have any benefits. Like, you have nothing. They don't get health insurance offered to them. They don't get guarantee of hours. They don't get any kind of well, up here, they're supposed to get sick time based on New York sick time law, but none of them know they have it. So it's very, very difficult work. And to compare it with a job where you can go and, like y'all have mentioned, work on less stress and get more hours, get guaranteed hours, it's definitely much more. It's much more difficult to recruit people and retain people in that field. And the folks that stay in the field suffer, their families suffer, they suffer. But they do it because it's their calling. So it's really unfair. And we're gonna lose people taking care of us as we get older and we want to stay at home. It's just not a sensible system.
Right.
So I see Shauna's hand. I'm going to ask one question and then go to you, Shauna. And I want to circle back to Leah and to Joanne and uplift something you had placed in the chat, which was a sign-on letter for the faith community and to sign on. Are there other things that we can do to support, or anyone watching can do to support your legislation?
Yeah, I'll just jump in if it's specifically for us. We are hoping to get a hearing soon on our bill, and we don't have the date set, but we would very much love to send that hearing date to all of you once we get that set and have you come out and support that. And yes, thank you. Please sign on this letter. This is one that we worked with Sister Faith and Reverend Cook on, specifically for faith-based groups to sign on to support SWET. Yeah, Joanne, any other asks on SWET?
Yeah, if there are organizations out there that would like to endorse the SWET campaign, that'd be terrific. You can go on our website, which is there. I think Rashida put it up there too. And you can also write a memo of support, because the business interests are lobbying very aggressively, because they don't really like the idea of workers touching their property and assets. So, because that's what SWET would allow, I mean, until the resolution of the claim. It's not that it goes anywhere, but it's just kind of, you know, frozen. So you can't hide it.
Thank you so much. And Emma, I see you put a sign-on memo, of support memo in the chat as well for the Unemployment Bridge Program. And we are at 8:55. So Shauna, I want to give you the last question before we close out.
I just, excuse me, I just wanted to comment that I have an organization which I'm seeking to expand on named State Healthcare. So with the home care industry, and even with nurses and physicians, I just believe we're under a huge redevelopment or shift from what we normally thought would have been, you know, what we deem as healthcare. You know, taking a better look at public and environmental health and how it affects us, again, on a broad spectrum. So with the home healthcare workers and nurses going on strike with certain organizations, or the home care workers feeling like they're not getting the appropriate wages for their work, I just believe we're under a huge development because our environment really contributes to our livelihood and also health.
Thank you. And Joanne? Oh, you're muted. Sorry.
Oh, just real quick to piggyback on what Shauna was just raising. I want to echo that and say for home care workers, besides wages, even more what we hear is how violent the 24-hour shifts are on their lives, on their health. I mean, many of them are now disabled and now themselves need home care worker, you know, help. Many of them have retired and they can't enjoy their retirement. They have insomnia, they have all kinds of injuries because of years of working 24 hours. Their relationships, they've had many marriage and breakups because they never could see their partners. They're estranged from their children because there were years where they just couldn't be there on a regular basis. So it's really wreaked havoc on the lives of people. And this is the reason why many home care workers don't want to do this work, because in New York City, especially, people have been offered 24-hour shift or no shift. So then you feel, you know, if you have to pay the rent and support your family, you have no choice. And that means for others who are looking for fewer hours because they have kids, there's fewer hours because some people are working 24-hour shifts, which is like 2 or 3 people's jobs, right? So anyway, that is one crucial thing because it doesn't make up, even though, of course, higher wages are welcome, but it doesn't buy back your health and your families.
Thank you so much. I see we're at 8:58. Peter, did you have any closing comments or anything you want to say to close this out, or?
No, I just really wanted to thank all of you for all of your comments and remarks here today. This is, you know, how we treat people who labor in our economy is really a huge moral question for us. And when we neglect people who work all of these jobs, you know, it not only damages them, but it damages our economy. And it destroys our sense of community. And so, you know, we just all have to try to support each other as best we can to, you know, advocate for just pay. And that doesn't take away the need for us to attend to other aspects of people's household costs, like housing, like healthcare, like childcare, even food, those are all structural costs that we need to address, in addition to being sure that people are paid a just wage.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you to all of the organizers, to the campaign leaders. Thank you so much for Alana, to Emma, to Leah, to Joanne, to Greg, to Joe, I'm going to say her name wrong, but to Rhonda, and to Kim and to Dennis, and to everyone who's joined us from our coalition, to Joe earlier, and Reverend Denise Walden Glenn. This has been a wonderful conversation. It will be available on the New York State Council of Churches YouTube page for playback, and I'll copy all these links and send them out. And I want to uplift again that this Wednesday there's going to be a rally for the excluded for the bridge fund, for unemployment bridge fund, and a major mobilization on March 1st. So with that, I say thank you so much, and again, we'll see you at the Capitol and see you in the fight. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great meeting. Take care.
Okay.
Thank you.
Feel
Good
better,
night.
Alana?